Good evening and welcome to the Journey Home. My name is Marcus Grodi, your host for this weekly program in which I've been given the great privilege of introducing to you men and women who, because of their great love for Jesus Christ, were brought home to the Catholic Church. And every week you have people from different walks of life. God leads us all a little differently. And this week we have Carol Fletcher, former non-denominational, former charismatic, and she's here to share how the Lord touched her life and opened up her heart to the Catholic Church. It had not been open in that way at all before, but she'll tell you that in a moment. Your calls and questions are an essential part of this program. So let me give you these numbers right now. You can write them down. If you have a question for Carol, please call 1-800-221-9460. Outside North America, you can call us at 205-271-2980, or you can send us an email at journeyhome@EWTN.com. Carol, welcome to the Journey Home.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here. Now, you came over from Colorado, right?
Yes, Beulah. Mm-hmm.
It's warm here. What's it like over there? I mean,
very cold.
Yeah, you got nailed already with snow, right?
Yes, there's supposed to be more snow on my way home. So.
Okay. We'll enjoy this great weather in Birmingham, Alabama.
Yeah, very nice here.
Well, let me get out of the way. Invite you, as I do every week, to share with the audience a little summary of your early spiritual journey.
Okay. Well, my early journey, I don't remember not knowing the Lord. I was raised in a Christian home, and I started out Southern Baptist, and was until I was 12, and we were introduced to the Charismatic movement, and were kindly asked to leave, and so went.
The Baptist church
it was pretty frowned on,
yeah.
And so. But my parents have always taught me to seek truth, and above all, to always pray for truth, and so I think I was always searching, because there was always kind of that feeling inside that I didn't have everything that was possible. And went through Bible college, went through just always just knowing that my life was going to be centered around the Lord.
So you chose Bible college?
Yes, 4 years
Great.
at Portland Bible College, and I met my husband, and we got married and had children. And as time went by, working in the church, was youth leader, and we had in the the church that we were in had small cell groups, and so my husband and I worked as like under shepherds for a group of people, about 50 people.
This was a non-denominational charismatic church that essentially had its own college that was training men and women for ministry in that church and its satellites?
In satellite churches, yeah. The church that we were attending was about 3,000 people. We'd helped pioneer it. We started out with 17 of us, and we pioneered it, and it grew to about 3,000.
Right.
And while we were there, just I watched people, through no fault of really any person, but just through the changing of things going on, being hurt. And
hurt because of burnout in the process?
Burnout because of what was going on in the churches, expectations not met, and we were really taught, and I didn't realize it till later, the whole feeling of, if I'm walking in God's will, then God will bless me. So what happens if I'm not being blessed? That means somehow I've gone wrong. And so I think through all of that process, it creates wounding. And
was it a borderline health and wealth gospel kind of a church?
Yeah,
all right.
It was.
So on the one hand, you could say that if I'm being faithful, then I should expect my life to show blessings.
Right.
Now the next level is, if I really want lots of blessings, then I got to be more faithful.
Exactly.
Okay, so there's a lot of pressure there.
A lot of pressure.
And if those blessings don't come, then it's emotional turmoil, right?
Right,
Sometimes
because you've done something wrong. And for me, I think it wasn't even so much that I wanted all the big blessings, but I felt like somehow I had let God down. And so how was I going to back up and find that place, where I'd lost him, where I'd gotten off path. And so we moved out and kind of pulled away. And I think a hurtful thing too in those kind of settings is you become almost a danger. And so people that we had been friends with had been warned, not to get involved with this anymore, because not really sure where they're going.
Where your theology was challenging the
I really right. And I'd really gotten to places like throw everything out of the basket and weigh it and re-examine it, and then I'll put back in my basket of beliefs what I can accept and live with. Well, during the process, the Lord was doing some healing, and at the time, my parents and my husband and myself and my 2 children were living on 10 acres in Salem, Oregon, and felt very strongly that the Lord wanted us to start a place for people to come and pray and be healed. And really just the idea of wounded soldiers just kept coming to my mind, that and my heart, that there needed to be a place to get away. And I'd
Wounded
never
soldiers, meaning men and
Christians.
women who were
Yeah.
dedicating their lives in this kind of theology and
Right.
were just being hurt right and left because it wasn't
Right,
working
and being
out.
dismissed if they
Yeah.
weren't useful anymore, and so we began to pray as a family and did a lot of fasting and praying together and setting aside, and felt very strongly to go to Beulah, Colorado, which I'm not really sure. I mean, the Lord, and only the Lord knows why He leads the way He does.
Was it one of those phone book things?
It
or
was. It was a map. I just felt it, and we felt in Beulah. It was, Isaiah 62. It's the land God married. It's
There
like,
you go.
yes, this is. We were so excited. The Lord really worked on our behalf too. We needed to sell our home, and we needed to cash out because of the way the balloon payment was. And this man came, and he had the exact amount of money, bought our house. Away we went, packed up everything. We had, 2 kids, 4 adults, 2 Labrador retrievers, 2 cats, everything in a U-Haul, and away we went, and with no place to land, just knowing that God was going before us. Because, see, I didn't realize the traces of that theology was really still there.
Yeah.
The feeling that if I
That's
was in,
exactly
this
the
was
kind of
God's
fulfillment
plan.
that fits that kind of theology.
It does.
If there's a blessing, then I must be right.
That's
If
right.
something's going good, well, then that's proof
That's right.
that I'm right with God. And this
That's
is
right. And this is how He's showing me. And not that He doesn't sometimes, but I had to learn the hard way that His handprints are all over when things
Yeah.
are going wrong too.
Yeah.
But we set off for Colorado and stayed in Beulah, and we didn't know anyone. I had called a woman. I homeschooled my children, so I called a woman who was also homeschooling there, and met up with her after we got there. And she said, there's a house down the way that is just perfect. It's for sale, but they might let you rent it. And I should say my husband and my father had a business that it's an orthodontic business, and it had a lot of mail-ins. So we were coming with a good income, and it was coming, so we weren't going to be destitute. It was going to be good. We rented this. It was perfect. It was like, this is God's in this. It's 65 acres, a beautiful log house, a little cabin. God was going to really open this prayer house. Well, God at that point tended sometimes He pulls the rug out from under you.
It's called Job.
I know. And I started looking immediately. Okay, what went wrong? Where did I go off track? And and when we got there, Beulah is a very, very small community, and very a lot of families that have been there for generations, and the church setting is very small, and so we had invited some people in to I do flannel graph stories,
Sure.
Bible stories, Southern Baptist days.
Right.
So I had invited some children on Sunday nights to come. Well, pretty soon we had up to 50 people coming on Sunday nights. The adults were coming for the Bible stories. And so we had a good worship time, and we did Bible study together. And so everything seemed to be
Looking good.
going good until bankruptcy hit, and we lost everything. The house that we were in, we just knew God was going to provide this beautiful home, and she raised the price and sold it to someone else. And so here we were with, really nothing that we thought that God was going to do, but through another friend who had told us that there's a house, it's partially done, it's almost finished, it'll be a great place. So we went out and looked at it, and it was kind of like a 5,000 square foot shack. It had been sitting there for 13 years. It had gray stuff and silver stuff and pink stuff all over the outside, no windows. And we're like, oh, the Lord would never do that to anyone He loves. He would never put them in that. And He did. Or He allowed us to. And, we'd ask friends, we said, do you think this is a wise move? It's out on 80 acres. Is this going to be good? And they said, yeah, this will be a good move. Of course, all these friends disappeared after we purchased, but we made a really crazy offer, and the man accepted it. And so we moved out there with our little 27-foot camp trailer with myself, my husband, 2 kids, 2 labs, 2 cats, my mom and dad lived in a little abandoned restaurant with all of our stuff in town in Beulah while we were going to build this. And a man came in and paid for our roof and got our well going. We're like, God is in this. This is going to be so good. He's directing and he's showing us where he's going. And that's when everything shut down. And we were just left alone. I've never suffered really from depression. That just isn't something that is common for me. And I remember I was looking around, and I homeschool, so I'm in a 27-foot trailer all the time. It was a really windy, snowy year, so my husband had to anchor our trailer down so we didn't blow down the hill. Then we had to put old hay around the bottom, and the deer at night, I'd hear them eating my foundation. And it was like, it's kind of like, I felt like Job, really. It's like, what have I done? Because the neighbor's Labrador came down, and so I had 18 puppies and 2 Labradors. I was living in a whelping box. So I'd get up in the morning, and I would sit on the one chair that was left room in the trailer with my Bible and my coffee, and I'd think, you don't care. Do you not know where Colorado is? Did you lose Beulah somehow? How did you lose my name and my address? And at the time, the kids and I had with homeschooling, we had gone through Genesis, and we'd started this whole process of putting the Bible in order. So we had everything kind of lined out, and we'd gotten to the book of Acts at the time, and so we were trying to keep homeschooling on, trying not to spend a lot of time crying and feeling like somehow it's like, Lord, I've spent all my life loving you. I've spent all my life seeking truth. I'm teaching a Bible study. I don't even know if I should be, because in the denominations we were coming out, it was like, a woman, that's questionable. Should I be teaching? And it was just, there was a lot of turmoil going on, and I felt abandoned. I felt, I'd given my whole life for the Lord. That had been my goal all my life, to serve him. And then here he leaves me in a 27-foot trailer in a big leaky house with a whole lot of dogs.
I was going to say far too many Labrador.
I know. The Lord used it as a blessing in the end because we were able to sell them. But for a while, living in a whelping box isn't fun.
That. Had you at the time wondered whether your theology was wrong? Did it ever cross your mind in that sense?
No.
I
really didn't.
It really didn't. Because and that's why I've asked questions on that, because I know some of our audience have not had that religious background. But the problem with that thinking, not that we as Catholics, we don't, it's not as if we don't believe God does honor, bless us when we are faithful. We believe that very strongly, but we also realize that we can't manipulate God in that way, and that sometimes God's ways are different than our ways. And so what you were experiencing was the downside, of that theology, because when something's wrong, what's the answer? And so for you, what led to despair, really?
It really did. And I don't think you see it coming, because you don't realize that that's how you're thinking.
Well, you also, in that theology, though, one of the good sides is there is often hope, though. The good is right around the corner. I just have to be patient. It's going to come. I know it's going to come.
That's right.
After a while, you can lose some of that hope and despair, but you still, you just know that I've done this, so God's going to bless me in this way, But the Catholic Church was not on the screen, right?
No.
And that was the last thing that you would have ever dreamed was the answer, or at least an answer to the. So how did all of a sudden, out in the middle of Beulah, in a trailer surrounded by Labrador puppies, did your heart get open to the church?
Well, in the process of losing everything, I had started working part-time in a restaurant in Beulah, and there was a woman there that I had seen a couple times, and I knew that she was Catholic, but I thought she was kind of barely Catholic because she had a reputation of praying. Isn't that awful? And I never thought of myself.
Catholics never pray.
So I never thought of myself as being really anti-Catholic. But when I look back, because I had friends who were Catholic, and I did my best to help get them saved and, into truth and with the Lord and have a relationship. And it's kind of crazy. Even she to this day says she can't believe she did it. My mom and I were at the restaurant because it had snowed heavily. And I was just depressed and kind of waking up slow and kind of grumping around. And the knock on the door, and this woman is standing at my door that I've seen a couple times at the restaurant, and she has her long jean skirt on and this little hat and big coat on. And she said, I don't know if you're open to this, but the Lord asked me to come to you today. And I'm like, okay. Like, okay. So she came in and she started talking about Mary and the Eucharist and the Pope. And I was like, who is this woman and what is she doing in my house? And she talked for about an hour, and I just was kind of in awe and kind of like not understanding anything really she was saying much. And at the end, right before she left, she said, God wants you to know that he knows where you are and he's aware of what you're doing. And I pray the stations every day at my house. She has a beautiful property in Beulah. And I pray at 3:00 and you're welcome. And she left. And so I thought, there's no way I'm going to go up to this lady's house. What are the stations of the cross? I never heard. It's like this just foreign. Well, closer to 3, I knew I had to go. I just had to. So I told my mom, I said, let's head up. Well, my only experience in a Catholic church, which we'd consider the house of idols, was when I was in 5th grade. My mom had let me go with my friend. And at that point in time, everyone still wore head coverings, because on my way out, she took the doily up from under the plant, shook it off, put it on my head, and said, "Keep that there." So I'm all during Mass, I'm worried about this doily and have a
Who did that?
My friend's mom when I was little. No, when I was little. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to a Catholic thing. You have to have something on your head. So I got this big scarf and I put it on my head. And Kathy, she's the one I drove up. She was like, "Oh no, I can't believe she showed up. She didn't really want me." It was like an invitation, but not. And so we started to go up into the stations, and she said, I sing the Divine Chaplet. It's like foreign to me, chaplet, divine. I mean, divine is a good word.
Right.
And so she began to sing the Chaplet of Divine Mercy on our way up. Well, we got to the first station of the cross. And I don't know what or why, but I was overcome with the presence of God. And I began to weep. And I wept through the whole, I just knelt and followed through all the stations. And I got to the end. And I was overwhelmed with the love and the reverence for the sacrifice. Because for me, I was saved, raised, living in victory. The sacrifice, yes, it happened, and suffering for Jesus, as far as I was concerned, was if I passed a track out and someone threw it back, and the suffering and the appreciation for the blood just was overwhelming to me. But I thought, that was a cool, that was good. Let's put it in its place. Well, Kathy would, bring little prayer things, and then she invited me to Mass. And in the process, I was trying to figure out how I could disprove this whole thing. So I had taken off to the library and gotten all these, the rise and fall of the Roman Catholic Church.
All the anti-Catholic.
All the anti-Catholic Church. And as I'm checking out, the librarian she's looking at them and she's checking them out. And she says, "Oh, it looks like someone's searching." So I'm not searching. She says, "Yes, I think you are. I'll be praying for you." Well, she had a crucifix on. It's like, no, you're one of those. Don't pray for me. I don't want because crucifix. Only Catholics wear crucifix. But so I took all these books home, and I began to read. And I gave some to my mom and said, "Hey, do you read these? I'll read these." And the whole time, I was praying desperately that God would not say that he was in the Catholic Church. I wanted to know he really wasn't there, because that just wasn't anywhere I wanted to go. And then in the process, the Lord, Kathy's real point for me was to get to know Mary. She she kept saying, I don't really care if you become Catholic. I just want you to understand you have a blessed mother that loves you and is looking after you. And I'm like, come on, that's some girl that God said, it's time, I'm coming, you. I mean, I never thought about Mary as being anyone special, which really doesn't make sense now.
Right.
But it, to me, it's like, she shows up in a couple verses. She's not that important. And, it's hurtful to think that
say that
now.
No.
But that's how I felt. She was a huge block for me. And anyways, I began reading, and Kathy, of all books, to give someone, and I think back now, it's like the Lord must have known I needed just a smack on the head. She gave me Louis de Montfort's book about devotion to Mary.
That's
that was my introduction.
Yeah, that's
it's like
it's very Catholic.
Very,
book.
and I would call my mom and I'd say, "This is heresy. This is awful. I'm not going to touch this anymore." And then I go back and I'd read.
Just wait. I'll comment on that later. But for now, let's just keep going. Right. Well, if you have no Catholic background, that book is like, whoa, wait a second.
Yeah. It's huge. Yeah. And so I'd call and I'd say, well, there's some good things in here. It's like some of these, some of this stuff is good. And I'd hang up. And then I'd call back and I'd be in tears, say, Mom, what are we doing? We've got to get away from this. We're getting sucked into something really bad. This is not good. And every night I would go to bed and I would just cry and I would ask the Lord to stop. I didn't want to go here. I didn't want to be Catholic. I didn't want to be attached to this. And so afraid, I think because of my prayer always being for truth, so afraid that I was being led away from truth because I could feel myself drawn and I didn't want to be drawn. And the clincher for me was Kathy invited me to a Mass. And on the way there she said, now you can't receive the communion because you're not Catholic. And I thought, well, I'm a Christian, come on, And she said, no, we don't have the same understanding. And so she gave me a little kind of quick lesson. Well, once again, no one told me not to wear head covering, and I guess the Lord just allowed me to be blind. So I thought, they probably thought, here's Mary Magdalene once again, because I've got this big cloth over it's not a little scarf, I got a big scarf over my head, but it kind of made like a little cocoon for me, and it kind of separated everything else. So I know the Lord, just in my goofiness, allowed it. And during Mass, it's like everything's okay, and but when Father Pettit was the priest there, raised the Eucharist, I knew. I was like, the Lord just instantly put in my heart that was him. And I was overwhelmed and hurt because they wouldn't let me partake. It was like, you're here and I'm not going to be able to partake. And so I knelt during Mass and wept with his big head covering on through the whole Mass after. And it's like that was the hook in my jaw that I couldn't let go of. So I was, even though at the same time I was trying to say and prove the Catholic Church was wrong, I saw him. I saw the Lord that I love. And if that's where he was, then I wanted it. And so I began to read John chapter 6, and it's like all of a sudden it was different. He said, if you partake of me, you have no part of me. And it's like, there really is a way. I had made that all kinds of metaphors, all kinds of, I do partake of the Lord. I read my Bible. I pray. I talk to the Lord. I sing music to the Lord. I write music. And here he's saying, yeah, that's good, but you can physically partake. And so that was very difficult because I had this dilemma, do I accept, because at the same time I'm still living with all these puppies. I'm still, in a 27-foot trailer, and the Lord is silent, and I've got a woman who keeps telling me, you don't need to become Catholic, you have to. I just want you to know Mary and know that she's our Blessed Mother. And so that became a real struggle for me. And I went to a lot of different meetings. I went to confession 3 times without ever confessing because it was a place to talk to a priest and he couldn't get away. He was stuck in the box. So there was just a lot. And one priest finally told me, he said, look, you do not have to become Catholic. He was like frustrated with me because I was like, I said, yes, I do. If it's truth, I do have to become Catholic. And I think he wasn't really sure quite what to do with this woman who was just, it's like, because I just the internal struggle.
You experienced great anxiety over that. That was what the priest was dealing with there. He was trying to calm you down.
It's like, it's like, just back off, girl. It's like,
give it time here.
It's like, but if this is truth, I don't want to waste any time. I want to be Catholic if it's true. And we were very, very blessed because I think the Lord even allowed us to be away from the rest of our family, because there wasn't a lot of outside voices. People from the Bible study, at that time, I said, I don't feel really good about teaching Bible study anymore because I don't really know where I'm going. And they were like, can't you just think Catholic? Do you have to be one? It's like, yeah, I do, because it's not enough, it's not just the thinking and the emotions and the theology of it. It's the actual partaking that's the most important. And Father Pettit, this priest who I was at the first Mass, had spotted us at another Mass that we had all come to. And he came out to Beulah every Sunday night and did our CIA with us. And I loved it because it's this first time I'd been with some pretty, international speakers at Bible college and worked with them, and they knew everything. And here was this very humble priest who I would say, Father Pettit, are you telling me that this is the best place to be? Are you telling me that I have to accept that Mary was born without sin? And he'd just stop and he'd say, yeah, I am, Carol. I was like, and I'd have questions, and he'd say, I don't know, but let me bring a book. And he'd bring a book, and actually Kathy, I think I shared with you earlier, she brought me Scott Hahn tapes, and I thought, what a traitor! He left the faith. He's become Catholic. How can I respect this? And convert stories weren't always. Some were good, and then some were like, well, I just think they didn't hang on to truth. They just didn't know they didn't know what they had, and but just as time went by, the Lord began to soften my heart, and actually largely through the lives of the saints. I read Story of a Soul and was very drawn to St. John of the Cross, and seeing the value in suffering, and truly, not just suffering for Jesus, it wasn't just a saying. It was really understanding that this would bring growth, and this was good, and that it didn't matter what I went through, he loved me. And I think that for me was the most comforting thing that I found in the church, was that it wasn't so much, I didn't have to do anything right. I know we live holy and we strive to live a life that is,
was an important part of our journey. But I think the struggle that you went through, you may not have been open to the fullness if God hadn't let you have a dry period, a deep struggle for you and your family. All right, we're going to take a break, and we'll come back to some moment. We'll have your phone calls and emails for Carol. See you in a bit. Welcome back to the Journey Home. Our guest tonight is Carol Fletcher. Thank you for condensing, how the Lord has worked in your life down to those. It's not always easy. In a moment, I'm going to give the phone numbers again. But let me go with the first email. You ready for an email? Okay. This comes from Jonathan. Dear Carol, why do you think that many of our separated brethren view the Catholic Church as spiritually dead? What new life have you found as a Catholic convert? Best of blessings, Jonathan. Thank you for email.
I think that Catholics often are viewed spiritually dead by our separated brethren. Or I think how I viewed, I should say, was because of the falsehoods that were taught. And for myself, I was so...
That you were taught about the church.
That I was taught about the Catholic
Yes.
Church. And I think some of that comes from people who are kind of introduced in the Catholic Church, like born Catholic and leave, and they don't really know the fullness of what they had when they left. I don't think they would leave if they understood the fullness. And because I was surprised when I began in my journey to first read like St. Augustine and the different church fathers, I thought, I was like, wow, they really knew the Lord. I was like, why I was surprised, I don't know. But I think just the falsehoods that are taught, it's not knowing the truth. And for me, I have such the Catholic Church for me, as the Mother Church, and our Blessed Mother has just brought such a fullness and a richness to my life and my prayer life. Because I used to think praying the Rosary was vain repetition. It's like the scripture, don't pray in vain repetition. Then I realized vain repetition really is, Lord, I need this, I need this, I need this. Lord, hear my voice. You've got to hear this. I'm claiming this in your name. Those sometimes become the vain repetition, trying to manipulate and turn God's hand. When a father at Pecos told me once, I came to him and I said, I'd come to a place. He said, I don't know what's happened. I pray, and as soon as I began to pray, it's like the Lord just shuts my mouth, and I'm not able to ask anymore what's wrong. And he said, it's like this, Carol. He said, you're in a boat in the dark with no oars. Relax and just allow the Lord, and to give that over to our Blessed Mother and allow her to pray through you. Because they know better. And to me, that was such a release. And the Catholic Church brings that fullness, that kind of a lack of struggle.
Yeah.
It's a more.
I was thinking of
place.
another, which you've expressed, is that another reason maybe why those on the outside might see Catholics as, quote, spiritually dead, is because we don't understand the devotions of Catholics when we're outside, when they're doing, like you had said when you picked up the Montfort's book. Mm-hmm. Well, you didn't have any background to handle his spiritual biography of Mary. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of spiritual speculation or spiritual expression of his prayer life that when you come from the outside of the church, whoa, what's he talking about? The mantilla that you were wearing, the doily, you call it that. Well, we didn't understand what that was. Yeah. But when you come from a traditional Catholic background, you understand the sign of submission to God. Right. It's a beautiful symbol. When you see ladies kneeling before a statue of the Virgin Mary, wearing a mantilla, praying the beads, from an evangelical, charismatic perspective, whoa. Yeah. I mean, it's really more ignorance than it is than a judgment on ourselves than it was on those that we didn't understand. Part of the question was also in what you have found, and what you're saying is almost most of what you found is a great, like the Rosary is a great encouragement.
Yeah, the Rosary is wonderful, and I look back on those times because with wearing the covering, even at times when no one else in the church I was in was wearing it. For me, it was a spiritual a moment. There was that being set aside.
Sometimes I can see the blessing of having that because it cuts down the distractions.
It does, and especially when you wear one as big as the one I had.
Sheep, right? No.
It was almost.
Let's take our first caller, Lisa from Oklahoma. Hello, Lisa. What's your question?
Yeah. Hi, Marcus. Thank you for your program. I just love you guys. Sure. I've been studying the difference between Catholic and Protestant for 2 years now, but I have no confusion of how Protestants do salvation, the sinner's prayer, once saved, always saved, and how does the Catholic go through salvation?
Oh, okay, Lisa. Real simple question. Go ahead there, Carol.
You said you weren't going to leave me out.
I would never leave you out here. I'll let you start. That's the only reason we're joking about that, because it's a bigger question. First of all, there's no easy way to describe Protestant view of salvation.
No. No, there isn't. There isn't, because depending really in which, because I had friends who were Assembly of God and they believed that, I mean, you could lose your salvation. They didn't believe in once saved, always saved.
Right.
I think for me, the Catholic view of salvation is the process, and that's why I think I love more, because it's not a one-time, and I think that's always bothered me before, is that did I say the words right? You know, am I really saved? And in the Catholic Church, it's that growth and that process that starts with baptism and that, you know, that cleansing of the old man and the original sin, and that process of growth that comes through receiving the Eucharist and confirmation of the Holy Spirit and all of the different sacraments that grow and bring us to salvation. That it begins and it doesn't end until we're gone, you know, into eternal life. And I think for me that's it's a blessing, because I'm not, did I say the words right? Did I mean them really when I said them? Did I get it right as I would have before?
Especially when you're in the theology that has a direct connect between faithfulness and blessings.
Right.
When you have a truncated theology of that, and things aren't going well, then you begin to question, did I really commit myself to Jesus? And that can lead to despair. And I would encourage the viewer, I know you're doing your study on salvation, make sure you read the catechism on the life in Christ, that section of the catechism that will talk about that. And I won't take a lot of time, but just to give an example of the differences in the views, when I was a Protestant pastor, I was Presbyterian, I was a once saved, always saved Calvinist, and my view of salvation in many ways, I'd look at John 15. We're all familiar with that passage. I am the vine, you are the branches, now go produce fruit. And in a way that was truncated of my life. He's the vine, by grace I am a branch. Now my job is to evangelize. And I understood my calling in life for the rest of that was to serve Jesus by his grace and evangelize, and that's pretty common. The Catholic agrees with all of that, but it recognizes that there's other parts of John 15 that are important part. First of all, John 15, you've got to look at this 1 through 11 of the verses I'm talking about. He talks about the fact that you can be a bad branch by not producing fruit. Now, as Protestants, you could feel that if I'm not producing converts, I'm being unfaithful.
Right.
But we didn't worry about losing our salvation. We just had to go out there and beat the bushes more. But the scriptures talk very clearly that Jesus is talking to those who are branches, but don't produce fruit. What are the fruit? The fruit in the context is holiness, is virtues, the ways that we become like Christ. It isn't work. It is an openness to the blessings of his grace working through us, and then allowing our lives to be changed by his graces, producing the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, self-control, all those things that we see in Galatians chapter 5. We produce those. But there was another part of John 15 that we didn't see, and your whole theology missed. He said that we are pruned.
Right.
That branches, faithful branches, that have received his word are pruned. Sometimes the suffering takes away to test our trust in God, and sometimes to help us lean more on him and less on ourselves. You know, that's what salvation is. It isn't just Jesus saying, okay, stamped, you're mine, now go out and serve. It is, you're my son, you're my daughter, now walk with me. And it's a walk with Jesus. That's salvation by grace. But go to the catechism and look up the whole story of the church's teaching on salvation. All right, let's look like this email. This comes from Alan in California. Dear Carol, was it hard for you to accept the church's teaching on the Blessed Virgin Mary? You mentioned that. Maybe talk a little bit more about that.
It was very hard. Actually, Mary almost kept me out of the church.
She didn't.
No, the idea, the theology of Mary was very difficult for me, and I was very blessed. I had some very some beautiful experiences where I really felt like I had real meetings with her, and just the theology of her as my Blessed Mother, that she really is the Mother of God. Even looking at the litany, that was just mind-blowing. I read the litany, it's like, well, that makes sense. Of course, if God would, because I loved Old Testament history and the covenants, and it's all of a sudden the ark made sense. Why would God go to so much trouble to make an ark to hold his presence, and not go to so much trouble to make a woman and that womb so holy to hold his presence? That had never crossed my mind till I started looking through the litany of Mary.
Yeah.
And actually, through some of the more difficult books that I read, I found truth. And the books that were anti-Catholic, as I began to read through them and the discussions on Mary, it began to dawn on me. It's like, I was a little slow. If this church lasted so long, and if the belief and the love of Mary lasted so long, only by the grace of God, because you have to admit there's been some hard times in the church where it would have, had it not been for the Lord, would have fallen apart. But I would ask Father Pettit, I'd say, can I come in, because I love the Eucharist, can I come in and have Jesus and shelve this and maybe face it later? And he would, no, you have to accept the whole thing. And for me, just a meeting and realizing that, I think the thought just came to me, I think one of the hardest things for me with Mary was praying to Mary or to someone else, because as a Protestant, that was my most holy form of communication with God, was to talk to him. So if I shared that with someone else, it kind of cheapened that. Does that make sense? I mean, I felt like if talking to God is my communion with him, and I'm sharing it with everybody else, then that's not special anymore. And when I realized through communion and through the Eucharist, my communion with God was way more intimate and much more special, than talking to everybody else was okay. And so that really opened me up with,
especially when those are people that he invited you to talk to.
Right. It's like,
those
okay,
are his
it's like
family.
I can talk to Mary, and I can ask for her help, just like,
with hindsight, you were out in the Job period of your life, and God did bless you. He brought you a woman that told you exactly what God wanted you to know, which is that he knows where you are. And also, she wanted you to know Mary, because she knows that Mary will bring you to her son.
That's right.
Not to her.
Right.
Her focus isn't herself, it's her son.
Always her son.
Yeah, which is the message of Louis de Montfort in that powerful book.
Right.
That's really what it's about. Okay, our next caller, Fran from Pennsylvania. Hello, what's your call?
Hi, Marcus. My question to Carol is, she said that she got a set of books to study the Catholic Church and gave another set of books to her mother. And I was just wondering, she was struggling with the Catholic Church. Was it her mother struggling with the same question? I mean, whether or not the Catholic faith was the avenue that she should take as well. And did her family all convert with Carol?
All right, Fran, great question.
Yes, my mother and I, actually my whole family, we very much struggled with it. My mother and I went back and forth, and I was blessed. The Lord knew that. And see, that's where the Lord showed me. So not only do you need a blessed mother, you have a really good earthly mother. So I needed a lot of help. We struggled a lot with that. And yes, my whole family, we came in 10 years ago. My husband and my 2 children and my mother and father, we all came in together at the same.
Did you all read the books and fight over the issues?
Yes, very much. So probably my mom and I probably did the most. I tend to be kind of an intense person. At times it's like, I couldn't let it drop. And I think that was even the question we talked about with the priest. And he was trying to tell me, it's okay, Carol, take time. You don't have to be Catholic this moment. And for me, just that I do tend to get a little intense probably. And I didn't want to waste time. And so my mom and I really did a lot of struggling and crying. My children now, on the other hand, would go to Kathy's house, who's now my godmother, the woman who brought us in, but they'd go to her house and they'd come home with these little rosary beads and St. Michael's statue, and I'm like, no, I don't want these things in my house. And they're like, aren't these cool, Mom? We got this St. Michael chaplet, and we've got this. I'm like, no, please, no. But so, yeah, it was a huge family struggle that we went through. But the Lord, when in RCIA, the first section is inquiry. Ours is really poor Father Pettit. His time of inquiry with us was really being badgered with questions. And he was so patient and so good, just
So
to
again,
lovingly.
God blessed you with the right priest at the
He
right
was
time.
wonderful, and he just brought us through. And so by the time Easter Vigil came that first year, he had an all-night vigil for us, and baptized my kids like at 2 a.m. And he knew that we were more comfortable with immersion, so he painted horse trough gold and put flowers over it, and he had my kids immersed, and it was beautiful. We all, like I said, came in together. So
all right.
it was a very blessing.
Let's take this next email. This says, Dear Carol, coming from charismatic worship, don't you miss the praise in worship?
Well, at first I did, and then I went through a time feeling like I didn't really understand what real worship was, because charismatic worship, because I was very involved in the music portion of that. I love music. I love to sing. I play guitar and piano, and so I did. And the Lord has, in His own timing now, I'm helping a high school and a college youth choir on a Sunday Mass in our home church once a month, or twice a month now. They've moved us, and we're doing more of the contemporary music from Spirit and Song, and added the guitars and stuff. And so, but I found it's like that's good, but that's not true worship. True worship is from the heart, and yes, it's good to have all those fun feelings of singing and clapping, and some of the songs to me that are worship, the songs, there's that heart, just open prayer before the Lord, and but true worship really has to come from the heart first. And so, but the Lord has been good to me after a time now. He's allowing me to work with kids. I love the kids, so yeah. So
well, again, I know that same struggle, because when I was a pastor, our church was an evangelical worship, and we often had the typical music on the wall and people up in front with microphones, and coming into the church, there's a sometimes difficult transition as you're trying to understand Catholic worship, and then you come to the point realizing that, especially when you understand adoration before the Blessed Sacrament, that you can have tremendous worship with no music, no words. You're experiencing the reality of Christ. And then you start realizing the beauty of the liturgy.
That's right.
I mean, the prayers of our liturgy sometimes frustrates me when I see people in Mass flippantly just reciting or not paying attention. Recently saw a man when we all knelt before the Blessed Sacrament during the time of the consecration, and he picked up his bulletin, and he was kind of bent over, but he was reading the bulletin while the consecration. You listen. You don't just listen to the words of the liturgy, but you pray them. And they're beautiful prayers. There isn't better. That's why we say them. The Gloria. Why do we say that? It's a tremendous prayer.
That's right.
And we're saying it word for word with the angels in heaven during the time we're celebrating Mass. So, if there's a problem in Mass, it's usually here.
That's right.
Not out there somewhere. It's usually here with us. And we need to be more open to the work of the Spirit in our heart. Let's see, another caller, Valley from Florida. Hello, what's your question?
Hi, Marcus and Carol, praise the Lord. I'm calling from Key Largo. I am a cradle Catholic, and my question, loving your joy, loving both of your joy, and I have that joy as well.
Great.
And knowing that Pope Paul VI has told us all that, the purpose of our whole church is in order to evangelize.
Yeah.
What are your suggestions, Carol and Marcus, for evangelizing both Catholics and non-Catholics, because we all need to be evangelized every day?
All right, great question.
I think just really living your faith. We kind of, in our family, have I love St. Francis saying, that you live it, and if you have to, you say something. Because if it's not there, people see, when they see that joy, that no matter what's going on, and that love, and being open. And I think that sounds the scariest thing, because before I was Catholic, actually one of my classes in Bible college was evangelism. And I'm not a good door-to-door person. So I took the easiest way to do it is go do a survey, because we had to do an outreach. And but I realized for myself sometimes as a Catholic, it's do I still do these, go tell others like I did before? And, but just being open to in the line in the grocery store, when things going on.
Your friend Carol.
Kathy, yeah.
Kathy modeled the
That's
boldness of Catholic evangelization, and you build friendships. We got to have friendships. That's maybe one of the biggest problems we have in America. Do we have friendships? And that's really one of the keys. God has created within us a need for friendships. We're called to love our neighbor as ourselves, and God has planted that ability within us to do that, empowered by grace. It's just that we're so focused on ourselves or a misunderstanding of what our relationship is with those. So friendships need to be built. But number two, that boldness of Kathy that asked you, never would have thought in the world.
No, she told me, she said, I was so scared because here you are doing a Bible study, and I knew you knew the scripture, and I didn't know where things were, and I'm coming to your door and saying this is what God says. But I think, too, one thing that goes along with that boldness is when we can take away from ourselves the responsibility of what happens with that seed. We plant seed, God's the one who has to bring the increase. And so when we take that, then we're not guilty and we don't get the credit. So it works both ways. And if you remove that from it, then it gives you boldness to speak into someone else's life.
Your friend Kathy modeled evangelization by asking questions and sharing about the faith. Number two, inviting you to the stations or to prayer. And number three, invited to Mass. Those are great ways that we can evangelize our friends. How many friends have we not talked to about our faith or invited them for prayer or to Mass? It's something we can do. Let's take one more email. Joy from Iowa. Hi, Marcus. Please ask your guest what the role of the sacrament of reconciliation has played in her life. Thanks. So once you quit using the box for cornering your priest,
they were.
How about the sacrament of reconciliation? New in your life?
Very new. I struggled at first with that because, it's why can't I I've been talking to the Lord for these small amount of years. And, I've been talking to him and telling him everything I need to know. Why do I need to go to a man? And for me, I think the most practical thing when I finally went, and Father Pettit, took us through the teaching, and I finally went, I cannot tell you, because you went through it, the amazing sense of release. When I heard the words, you're absolved. And it's we're flesh and blood. I have ears, I have hands, I have a mouth, I have senses. And to hear God through a man say, you're absolved. It was just such a release for me. And I think so for me, it's been it's been a good addition. I struggled against it, and
which is common.
Well, see, and then for 3 years, it's kind of God's little trick on me. I think I helped people come in to the Catholic Church. I taught RCIA, and I worked with children, teaching them reconciliation. And I thought it's so interesting that was those things that were hard for me. Actually, I watched these kids, they weren't as scared as I was. I was white knuckling it in, but there's such a release.
Carol, let's assume there's a few folk watching that maybe are in the same place you were. What would you like to say to them to encourage them to make the same journey? Why should they do the same journey?
I think that the peace and the love that you find in coming to the Catholic Church, to let go of the fear and to find that, if the Lord is leading you in truth, just pray for truth. And the Lord is faithful. That's a prayer we always know He can and will answer. I think truth is something He wants to bring into our life. So just relax and just center on the Lord. Ask our Blessed Mother, even if you don't, because I can't tell you, I was so rude to her a few times. I said, if you're there and you're hearing, then please. And through her intercession, she has just done amazing things in our life, physically and spiritually. And I just would encourage you to take a breath, relax, and ask the Lord to open your heart to what He has to say to you.
Carol, thank you very much for joining us on the program and
you.
sharing your journey. God bless you
Thank
and your
you.
family. Thank you for joining us. Have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.